Hello, everyone. Welcome to our program. My name is Diane Simmons. And before we get underway, I have a couple of observations. About 120 years ago, at the time of the installation of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, an American poet wrote a poem celebrating that event. And I'd just like to quote a few of the lines from that poem. Send to me your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Send these, the tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And as we're convening here this evening, thousands of people from Central America are convening on the U.S.-Mexican border, many of them fleeing oppression, hunger, violence, and the threat of death. And instead of being met with compassion and assistance and love, they're being met with hatred and violence and tear gas and the threat of lethal force, which is, of course, in complete contravention to the values that we are supposedly cherishing as American citizens. We've convened a panel this evening to discuss these issues and what the response of responsible American citizens should be to the outrageous abuse of presidential power that this represents. To begin with, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Yisrael Tubman, who is an independent rabbi here in Salem. And Rabbi Tubman is going to address issues reference immigration, refugees, asylum seekers, and in particular, with relevance to Jewish history and Jewish values. I might add that Rabbi Yisrael devotes a great deal of her time to working with the refugee community. We also have former Mayor Mike Swaim. Mike is a former three-time mayor of Salem, well known here in the Willamette Valley, and has also been involved with issues around sanctuary refugees and asylum. He was for some time the pro bono legal counsel for some of the immigrant community here in Salem. And finally, we have Mr. Pedro Sosa from the American Friends Service Committee. And Pedro is intimately involved with the immigrant community here in the Northwest, does a great deal of work. It's his full-time job, travels around the Northwest, Oregon, Washington, I believe, Idaho, and Pedro has a unique perspective on these issues. So I think I'd like to begin with some questions for Mike Swaim. Mike, could you lay out the legal framework for the traditional practices of treating refugees in the U.S. As eligible for political asylum?
Okay, thank you, Diane. Pleased to do so. I think it's really important to kind of get an idea of what the truth is, both legally and factually, because I agree with Donald Trump. There's a lot of fake news out there, and unfortunately, most of it's coming from him in his office. But in any case, we need to kind of at least be talking the same language to understand why it is important to even be, involved in or care about these issues. And so basically, you have to categorize these people in three categories: immigrants, who are people seeking to leave their country and come, in this instance, the United States, and ultimately to become permanent residents with a green card and a pathway to citizenship. Then we have refugees, and refugees are those people who are subject to persecution in their own home. With regard to immigrants, it doesn't have to be, and most of it isn't, a migration because of persecution. It's a migration because they want to live someplace else. With refugees, that's not the motivation. They're escaping persecution, and they seek and they come here and establish permanent residency and a pathway to citizenship. Then the third category is asylum seekers, and asylum seekers are those people, in this particular instance, coming to the United States trying to become refugees, trying to become legal refugees. And so it's important to keep those categories separate. So all asylum seekers are immigrants, all refugees are immigrants, refugees are seeking to escape persecution, and asylum seekers are trying to become refugees so they can prove their case. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about in a minute. There's some basic law that we deal with in terms of refugee status. And although it's been an issue for, centuries and centuries, the right to move between countries is one that was first formalized in 1948, December 10th, 1948, by the United Nations. And it appears in Article 14 of the Declaration of Human Rights. By the way, December 10th is the United Nations Day, and here in Salem we celebrate that with an event in the evening which we call Salem Speaks Up. And Salem Speaks Up allows our citizens to come and talk about human rights as they experience it here in Salem. So it's held at 7 o'clock, I think it's at the Micah Building next to the First Methodist Church downtown. So that might be something they're interested in. So you had the first act, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 14, where all of the countries in the world agreed on this, that everyone has a right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. Okay, so that is a basic human right, but it's not binding. It's not binding. In addition to that, it's aspirational. In addition to that, we had the 1951 Convention regarding the status of refugees. That's a declaration, a convention, an agreement passed by the United Nations General Assembly. Again, it's an international agreement, but it's a non-binding agreement. Where you get into binding agreements, you come here in the United States to the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. And there's one part of that that is really central to our discussion this evening, because it shows the false nature of the statements of Donald Trump when he says that it's illegal for asylum seekers to cross the border anywhere but a port of entry. The 1965 Immigration Nationality Act, passed by the United States Congress, still valid law today as of this minute, states that any foreigner who arrives in the United States and then, quote, whether or not at a designated port of arrival may apply for asylum. That is the law. When Trump says you've got to go to a port of entry, he's in breach of the law. And, knowledgeably so. I think he's been advised that that's not what the law is. He chooses not, like in many instances, not to abide by the law. So in any case, the 1965 Immigration Act says that if you're an asylum seeker, you can come anywhere. Well, why is it important to be able to go someplace other than a port of entry? At a port of entry, when you start pushing people down to a single place, they become a target for illegal, unlawful, and assaultive behavior on the Mexican side, for example. You have cartels there that are robbing people, that are raping women, that are kidnapping people and holding them for ransom because they are a target. They are literally, they've got a bullseye on their head because they're amassed in one place and can't go anywhere.
And we see this happening right now.
And that's exactly what's happening right now. And there's thousands, 5,000, 5,000 people there, and they're only processing, according to the regulations that Trump has passed, 100 applications a day. So it's going to be months, maybe even up to a year, these people are going to be held there. So the act that I just quoted, 65, is one that says people don't have to come in that way, and people don't want to come in and be there in a target. They want to cross wherever it's safe, because they want to get across the border and be in the United States and safe as fast as possible. In any case, that is an important fact. Then we have the U.S. Refugee Act of 1980. Because so much of the immigration law was scattered throughout a lot of regulations and statutes, they brought it all together in 1980 and provided for a permanent and systematic, they say, procedure for admission of refugees. Okay, but what is it, and this is really important for people to know, Trump makes it sound like you come across, you say, I'm scared to go home, and you're in. That's what people are trying to say. That's not it at all. It is hard to gain refugee status. I think the statistic is that out of 100 applications, 20 are successful. So it's 20% success rate, 8% failure. In order to successfully become a refugee, you have to prove 3 facts, and you, as the potential refugee, have the burden of proof. You got to prove that you have a reasonable fear of persecution in your own country. It can't be that you think maybe you're at risk. You can't be that you may be at risk in the future for some reason. It's got to be a reasonable fear of a present persecution in your country. You got to prove that. You got to prove that you're actually being persecuted, and only in 5 areas. And so you got to show that you're being persecuted in one or more of these areas: race, for your religion, for nationality, for your political opinion, or for being a member of a particular social group. Okay, so you only need to qualify in one of those, but if you don't qualify, say you're just afraid of your husband is abusive and is harming you, may harm the kids, maybe has harmed that's not sufficient. That's not sufficient. You've got to prove one of these 5 exists.
Well, if I could just interject
Sure,
for a moment,
yeah, please
Mike,
do.
I think it's quite clear, however, that given the history of American involvement in Central America, that a great many of these people are in fact facing the threat of death or severe sanctions if they are deported back to their countries of origin. Would you not agree with that?
That's true. And in fact, if you gain refugee status and something goes wrong, one of the conventions provide that you can't send them back to the country that they were being persecuted from originally. You have to send them to some other country. But the final issue is you have to prove that the government is either involved in the persecution or is either unwilling or unable to protect you, the asylum seeker, from being persecuted by some private party or entity. Now, if you prove all those things, every last one of them, to an immigration judge, you are admitted as a refugee, and you have the protections. You get a green card, have a pathway to citizenship eventually after a period of at least 5 years, is my understanding. If you fail to prove one of those things, you're out. You don't get refugee status. If you're in the country, in the United States, you have to be deported. And so it's a very strict test, and that is one that people don't really realize. It is tough to get legal status. People sacrifice a lot to get here: life, limb, their money, their future, and then we put them through a rigorous test. And some, like the Trump administration, wants to narrow the group that can even take the test.
Well, Mike, I want to come back to you in a few moments.
Okay.
There's some other things that we want to discuss that you're uniquely qualified to do. And I want to move on to Pedro for just a moment. I have a personal observation. I would like to say that I fully endorse the remarks made by Mr. Robert De Niro a few months ago at an awards ceremony regarding Trump. Bravo, Mr. De Niro. You speak for many of us. Thank you, sir. Pedro, again, you are intimately involved with the immigrant community. I'd like to begin by asking you, what could the United States do with reference to your home country, which is Guatemala, I believe, is it not, that would help people want to stay in their own country, in Guatemala? In other words, what is the effect of the influence, positive or negative, of the American government on your country?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and an honor to be here in this show. And yeah, my name is Pedro Sosa. I am from Guatemala. I am a refugee. I applied in 1997, and my case is still going on. And it's not easy to qualify. Even we have proofs of persecution. It's been hard. But in my case, I left Guatemala. I left my country because of the civil war. The 36 years of civil war, where about 200,000 people were killed and disappeared. Millions of internal displacement, and thousands of people went to different countries. I was one of them. I went to Mexico City. I lived for 5 years in Mexico City, and then moved to the U.S. That's one of the reasons, because we couldn't live anymore under this situation. Lots of persecution from the government. Suddenly, it's supported by the U.S. Our military in Guatemala was trained at the School of the Americas, and then lots of people die, disappear, and during these 36 years, and we didn't have any choice, and we had to leave our country, and we came here thinking we are in a safe place, but it's not true. We're still looking for that place where we can raise our children in a safe way, but we still fighting for our rights. And like you mentioned, the United States has to do with economic policy with different countries, free trade agreements, the support of the government. The government using for they call security, but it's to give resources to the army, and the army
And
is not
if I could
protecting.
interject for just a moment,
Yeah.
Pedro, is it not the case that the overwhelming amount of aid that goes to Guatemala is not aid at all, it's support of the military, of the army?
Yeah, but they called aid to Guatemala.
Well,
but
it's,
it goes,
yeah, they call it
yeah.
aid, but it's really military.
Yeah, it's a military,
yeah.
and then that's using against the community. It's not using for education, for development for the community. It's not that case, and then I see that the responsibility of this country, it should be also responsible for the forced displacement of the people, because the people just not coming because they wanted to live in Oregon or somewhere else in the United States. It's not easy to do that, to leave behind family members, friends, your neighborhood. It's not easy. And then that's why I think this country should be responsible also for these people displaced because of the economical policies they have with our country, like free trade agreements. Currently in Guatemala, they have lots of presence of the mine companies. The people in the community can't live anymore because the environment, it's not good. The water, it's not healthy anymore. The people had to leave, but not where they can go. The economical situation, it's bad. We have to look for a safe place to live our children. It's a human right to migrate, like what he just mentioned. The December 10th is the International Human Rights Day. December 18th is the International Immigrants Day. And there is lots of international agreements where mentioned that our rights should be respected in our way or during our journey, and then where we are receiving, or the country where we go, should be respected our rights as immigrant and our family.
And I think it should be pointed out as well that the same conditions essentially apply in the neighboring countries of El Salvador and Honduras, that American involvement in those countries has created the same situation, essentially, that obtains in Guatemala. Is that not so?
Yes, yes, it's affected all, mostly the Latin American countries, where this country has external policy agreements, and then like Honduras. If we remember the coup with Manuel Zelaya, and also with the current government, Juan Orlando, it's just imposed. Supposed to be during the election, the system went down, and the other government was in the election was high, and then when it went down, when it came back, and the other government, the other how do you say the other? The other one, it's high. It changed a lot dramatically the election in terms of numbers. And what does mean? It's something bad happened during that time. It's I think it was intentional to make it down the system to change the numbers.
Well, we know, for example, that in your own country, Guatemala, that the United States has interfered repeatedly with elections and has actually overthrown elections in Guatemala and has supported dictators in all three of those countries. So I think perhaps what we're talking about here is the fact that, as Jimmy Carter has pointed out, that it's almost impossible with the influence of the United States in those countries to have a free election in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's causing right now the exodus of people from Honduras and Central America came together because they feel safe to come with a big group to come to the United States.
Well, I want to come back again to you, Pedro, as well, but I want to ask Rabbi Israela if you could describe the Jewish perspective on immigration.
Thank you, Diane. Yes, I'd be happy to. The Jewish perspective is born out of our own faith and our own history. From our faith point of view, we have a foundational belief in God telling Abraham to rise up and to leave his home, his family, his father's house, and to go where God will show him. And then he runs into a difficulty, which is famine. And so he has to stop off in Egypt. That's the nature of Jewish history also. We have lived in a number of places and have had to leave for a variety of reasons. Exile. I'm thinking of Spain. Just fear of safety, Germany, Poland, and Russia, pogroms, other pogroms, Eastern Europe, and these are all at different time periods. And so Jews have had to leave various communities and start over. We are immigrants almost from the get-go. So that's a part of our history, and it's also a part of our faith structure. We were strangers in a strange land, and we must remember what it's like to come from another place and to start over and to deal with a new country, new language, new culture. And so from a Jewish perspective, we will continue to support those people who continually have this need to leave a country and to be ripped out from where they are and to start over. So in the light of that, we have many Jewish organizations that aid in that process. The first organization that I wish to speak about is called HIAS. It's the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. And it comes to mind particularly because during the lead up to the shootings in Pittsburgh, where 11 worshipers, elderly worshipers, were murdered, were shot within their sanctuary. There had been, the week earlier, there had been a special Shabbat to recognize and dedicated to the issues of the refugee. And this synagogue participated in that, made a point of participating in it. And so the perpetrator of this crime specifically noted that he was against this, that he was against these people. he's not alone. There are many people who are either filled with a sense of hate and rejection of the new in their community, or simply uneducated and fearful because they are uneducated. So HIAS is an organization that has a broad spectrum of activity in a number of countries. Specifically, though, to deal with refugees, and the issues of refugees are settlement. Where can they be resettled? There are maybe over 60 million displaced people in the world who, for a variety of reasons, simply can't live in their homes. Maybe 25,000 of the, 25 million of these actually have to leave their homes, leave their countries, and go somewhere else. Of these, a very small percentage gets resettled in another community. And of that percentage, a very small percentage comes to the United States. When they come, we have a number of organizations that are Jewish organizations but reach out to the broader immigrant community to help resettle and find ways for people to become economically stable in their communities. I think that does it for the moment.
Okay. Well, Mike, coming back to you for the moment, I think what we'd like to have is an explication, a laying out of what legal response is there to the sending of several thousand troops, heavily armed troops, to the U.S.-Mexican border, and particularly in light of the fact that they're harassing and intimidating these folks on the other side of the border. They're firing tear gas canisters across the Mexican border. And tear gas is injurious. It can actually be fatal. And there are pictures all over the internet and in the newspapers of women running away with their children, barefooted children in diapers, running away from tear gas canisters being fired across the border. Is there a way in which the law can be used to prevent Trump from doing this sort of thing, from stopping it? What's the legal response, in other words?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of different legal responses. One is he's not supposed to use Army or Air Force troops in an enforcement capacity because of the 1886 Posse Comitatus Act. And so when he talks about sending and has sent troops to the, and we're out of time. Are we going to go on, or what are we going to do?
I don't know.
Keep going for a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, he's not supposed to do that. He's eroding that, and in violation. And so a lawsuit could be brought, and is going to be brought, if not already filed, saying that he is essentially violating not only the Refugee Act, Asylum Act, Immigration Naturalization Act, but also the Comitatus Act. By sending troops there, he's kind of blending and kind of stealthily, if that's a word, doing away with those legal principles by saying, well, they're going there to protect the border guards, and if they see a border guard with a rock thrown at them and being hit with the rock, or somebody beating up or having a fight with the border guard, that the Army troops can go there and essentially use force to respond. So for throwing a rock, they have force, and just recently he said, including fatal force or lethal force that could create fatality, death in that mission. And I think that is absolutely prohibited as well.
Yes.
So those are some actions that groups can and should take.
Okay, Diane,
Yep.
outro.
We're apparently running out of time, but this is an ongoing conversation. We're going to be talking about this again. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for coming, and we'll be talking about this again. Thank you very much. Hello again, everyone. This is the second installment of our program. I'm Diane Simmons, and we have a panel here to discuss issues regarding the situation at the U.S.-Mexican border at the moment. We have Attorney Mike Swaim, former mayor of Salem. We have Pedro Sosa, who is part of the immigrant community himself and works with the immigrant community. And we have Rabbi Israela Tubman, who is also involved in various ways with the immigrant community and is uniquely qualified to discuss this issue from the Jewish perspective. And I'd like to start with you, Rabbi Israela. I know that you are passionately concerned about what's happening to children of families who are being detained, families who are being broken up and separated from their children. And I know that this is something that that you're, again, uniquely qualified to discuss. You've done a lot of research on this, so please expound on that.
Well, thank you, Diane. Yes, I have to say that my overriding concern is indeed with the children. We saw the horrors of having them taken out of the arms of their parents several months ago, and we are not seeing as much of that now, and I simply wonder if it's just because film crews aren't getting there. However, what we do see in particular is a detention center in Texas. This is the Tornillo Detention Center, and it currently can house 3,800 children. Currently, they still have 1,400 beds available. Originally, this was intended to be a very short-term detention area for children, and it has turned into something very long-term. There are different rules for the children and how they live. It's very simple, it's very structured, and it's very bleak. The children themselves have rules that they have to live by. First of all, they don't have access to their parents. Many of these children are termed unaccompanied, which means they came across the border without parents. However, a number of them did come with parents, but once they are separated from their parents, they are termed unaccompanied. So these children have a life right now of structured play where they are constantly observed. They are all wearing the same clothes. They all have the same haircut. And I read earlier about perhaps in another facility where nobody is allowed to touch anybody. So children were not allowed to touch each other. This perhaps can protect them from some abuse, but what really happens is that they get starved for touch, and it is a human, it's a human need to keep us well balanced and healthy. So I'd like to turn back history and look at some Jewish community members who are now about 80, 90 years old. And these were hidden children. They had to hide away for their own safety. So many of us, of course, know of Anne Frank and her life. So many children sometimes had one parent, which kept them in a very stable emotional state relative to the situation. But many had to be given away to safe places where they had to learn new customs, such as if they went into Catholic protection areas, they had to learn Catholic prayers, how to use a rosary. They had to be able to fit in. They had to change who they were. Many children were taken at a very young age, as toddlers, as infants, and they went to homes, foster homes, that cared for them. And then at the end of the war, if they were supremely lucky, they made it back to some family member. That was not that common. So these children had long-term trauma because of their separation. So the hidden children who exist today have talked about what they term this kind of trauma. And one thing they said is, it never leaves you. So these 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds who have had this experience are looking now at what's going on with the children who are incarcerated in detention centers. And they know from their own personal experience that 3 meals a day and clothing and a place to sleep is not enough. So in this center in Texas, although they have textbooks, they don't have any formalized classes. They don't have the ability to distract their minds from their situation in any kind of regimented, regular way. And so plus they really don't have any time that is private time without being overseen. There's another concern about this particular camp, is that with the 2,400 children who were there and the perhaps 2,100 overseers, staff, all of the people who work there, they apparently are not being fully vetted. So we don't know how well those children are truly being taken care of. We don't know how well they are being protected from abuse. An issue came up about fingerprinting and the FBI fingerprinting process. And I know, Mike, you are more familiar with the legal side of this, but it's presented certainly in the newspapers as a real flaw in the system. So the fear is, from a Jewish perspective, is that these children will be kept away from their parents for an extended amount of time with no hope for change, no idea what's going to happen with them, not the familial bonds that they need to be healthy mentally. What is going to happen with these children should they ever get to leave? And what is going to happen to these children if they don't get to leave?
And if I can interject, Rabbi, would you not to put words in your mouth, but would you not describe this as an outrage, separating these families from their children? I mean, it's criminal, is it not?
It is so destructive. It is so destructive, and it is destructive in a way that they may not heal from. Yes, it's an outrage. It is inhumane, and there is no reason for it. There is no financial reason for it. Currently, our government is spending approximately $1,200 a day per child to maintain them in this facility. All the costs of everything, food, water, care, $1,200 a day per child. That makes no economic sense for our government. I can't imagine why we would be doing that. And I am sure nobody can imagine why we are spending that kind of money to perpetuate this kind of system.
Well, if I can again interject, I think most of us would agree, I hope, that this is scapegoating. This is scapegoating. Finding, as happened in Germany during World War II and before World War II, finding a scapegoat, someone who is perceived as helpless, persecute them, and use that as a distraction from what's going on. Pedro, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to add about we just mentioned. It's the other fact. It's the profit they make it. Not only
Yes.
the government pay these $1,200 a day, but somebody else is making profit of this. One of the organizations is Casa Padre in Texas, who makes lots of money for children and the adults. Also, there is a bed they call bed quota. It's an agreement the federal government have with this private prison. At this moment, it's 39,000 people in detention, 39,000 immigrants in detention, $165 per day. It's like a hotel.
And this is a profit-making organization. These are private corporations that are making money from the incarceration of these people.
Yes, two main companies. It's GEO, who runs the Tacoma Detention Center, GEO. The other one is the CCA, the Correctional Corporation of America. These two main companies making profit on the suffering of children and families, and nobody say anything about this.
Now, if I may,
Sure.
in documents that were essentially taken from the Trump administration and leaked to either the Washington Post or the New York Times, the original reason that then Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the Trump administration, President Trump included, wanted to separate families was to provide a disincentive for families to come in the first place. He wanted them to say, if we go there, we will have our children taken away from us. And that's such a horrible thing to contemplate that we'll just stay here and suffer in our present condition. That's better than perhaps never seeing our children again. So, and then of course the profit motive from the private sector arose, and that certainly wasn't something that the Trump administration is ignorant about. The way to make money off of public
The
policy.
administration is complicit.
They're complicit, no question about that. But it was at first an inhumane devil's choice to force families into saying, stay here and deal with the cartels, the various threats here at home, or take a chance on losing our children at the border. And nobody wants to be put in that position.
Well, of course not. I'd like to ask both Pedro and Israela in turn. Pedro, a purely emotional response would be fine, whatever you want to say. But how do you feel about the hatred that is being incited by Trump and his minions against the immigrant community? How do you feel about that personally?
I think it's it's very sad, and it's very sad. It's come from the government. We knew that before the election, he started with this message to against immigrants, against women, against everyone.
Exactly.
And then now I think they are taking that as an opportunity for people who hate immigrants, who hate people of color, to do whatever they are doing right now.
Yes.
We don't know how long is that gonna last, this hatred against us. But one thing I wanted to remind them, or Trump, his ancestors are immigrants. As indigenous people, I am indigenous from, I'm Maya Quiche from Guatemala, and I don't consider myself as immigrant in my own continent. because America, it's from Alaska to Chile.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
And then America is not only the United States, it's the whole continent, and that's why I don't consider myself as immigrant. And then they forgot where their ancestor came from, how they got here, what is the reason their ancestor came to this land. Maybe it's the same reason as the current immigrants come to the United States. But we have to remember our history. Otherwise, we're just ignorant if we don't know our history, where our ancestor came from and why.
And I'd like to add that Ernesto Che Guevara, Dr. Guevara, once remarked, as a very young man, and he maintained this all through his life before it was cut short by the CIA, that when he thinks of America, he thinks from the Bering Straits to Tierra del Fuego. Rabbi Israela, as a Jew, how do you feel? How do you react personally, emotionally to these killings, the obviously anti-Semitic hatred that's being incited by Trump and the administration?
Well, I think anti-Semitism has to be understood. It has to be understood as a kind of bigotry that has just permeated our country, Europe. There is no way to think about bigotry without thinking about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has all the opportunity you need if you want a textbook on how to create really unstable community. So how do I feel? I feel like if we don't do something, anti-Semitism is only one brand of bigotry. It will come for everybody who is not just like Trump, just not white enough. Ben Franklin said the Germans weren't white enough. I think that everyone needs to stand up and say, yes, my family came from somewhere else. And yes, it is an absolute abomination to take children away from their parents.
Absolutely.
I think everybody needs to say that. And everybody needs to say it where somebody can hear it.
And I think that's why we're here. Mike, getting back to the issue of what's happening right now at the border, I have a two-part question, and I'm going to commingle the questions, and you can handle them as you see fit. Two things. One, what is your reaction to the current events around asylum, refugees, the current behavior of Trump and this despicable administration? And from your experience as a progressive mayor, what do you think about the enormous pressure that is being put on mayors of American cities to effectively militarize their police forces under the Joint Terrorism Task Force?
Mm-hmm. Well, for the first, how do I feel about what's going on? It's caused me to stop and really consider what is it really that we're dealing with here that's manifested by the immigration and particularly Trump's response to people seeking a better life here in this country. And up until this administration, at least, we used to take pride in saying we're a nation of immigrants.
Exactly.
I mean, that was a good thing to say, and we felt good about it.
Exactly.
It was consistent with our fundamental beliefs. We said the Statue of Liberty, you quoted from that poet, and part of her poetry is on the statue, says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." But it's becoming clear to me, at least, and I think to many people, that that's aspirational. That's aspirational. It's not fact, and it's not our history. It is without question against history as experienced here in the United States. Each group that has come in, the Irish, the Polish, the Jews, the East Europeans, the Latinos, Latinas, have been met with huge and violent responses by those immigrants already here, or those progeny of prior immigrants already here. And only after the struggle, a hard-fought struggle with death and a lot of pain, do these other groups become more or less assimilated. So we don't practice what we preach. And I guess one of the things that bothers me about Trump's approach is that he actually crushes our ambition, our aspirational ambitions. He pulls back the curtain maybe and shows us, the wizard pulling the levers, which often is him, but it shows life not as we would like it to be, but as the lesser parts of us make it to be. And that is really sad. And the way I think that we have to respond to this is political. There is no legal, sure, you can sue them for some of these various things, but the answer is political. What happened when he started separating, as we were talking about, children from their families? Republicans, Democrats, Independents, non-affiliated, everybody on all sides of the spectrum says that is wrong. That is wrong, and we will not accept that. And what happened? For the first time in his life, probably, he had reversed course. And he signed a executive statement rescinding that policy.
In theory, though.
In theory. In practice, it still exists in some respects. And there's 1,000 or so kids that they can't find their parents. And Trump administration said, well, let the ACLU track them down for you. It's not our problem. Although it's his administration, his policies, and his abhorrent record keeping that created the condition which these children find themselves in now.
Can I ask you something?
Israela.
How did this come about? How does it look like legally? It looks like child theft to me. It looks like stealing children and playing games with them and putting them in harm's way, emotional harm's way, if nothing else. It sounds like kidnapping.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is falsely imprisoning the children. Okay, falsely imprisoning them. But they make the rules, and until you overturn the legality of the rule governs the process, and the rule is atrocious, as we know, and it's not going to change until 2020. And it's not going to change unless people vote. If they don't like the policies of the president, his administration, certain senators and certain congressmen and women, we got to vote in other people who do reflect our values. And that is the only result that will work, in my opinion.
Well, I'd just like to interject a personal observation. Again, it seems to me that other action is necessary, that the electoral process has been co-opted. We shouldn't ignore it, but I think that we need to mobilize people to take positive action to correct these things. Pedro, I'd like to ask you, let's say someone comes to the border from, it doesn't matter, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, seeking asylum, trying to get into the United States. They're turned away for whatever reason before they even get to the United States. They're frustrated, they're intimidated, they're frightened, they're discouraged by what's happening right now, the violence, the hatred. What happens to someone who has fled his or her own country out of fear for their own personal safety? Now they wind up going back. What happens to some of these people?
Yeah, we have heard some stories like some people didn't get the political asylum and they deported and they were died. They were killed. It's not safe for them, and that's why they are seeking for refugee, a safe place to live. But when they got here, just they denied, and then the risk is there. Yeah, but I wanted to say something about you just mentioned about to vote, and also something else we can do as a community. Like in December 10th to December 18th, the American Friends Service Committee is calling for a national action to do different actions in the national level in support of the exodus, the people in the border, to respect their rights to seeking for asylum. That's one thing they can do. And the other thing we can do also, it's we can call our Congress people to ask them to defund hate at the border, to demilitarize the border, because we are not in a war. The 15,000 troops at the border, that means like a war at the border. It's not a war. People are seeking for asylum. They are not criminals. They are they looking for a safe place.
Well, it is a war with helpless victims. It's a war with helpless victims. And I'd like to ask each member of the panel, in the time we have left, very briefly, apart from voting, apart from contacting your congressperson or senator, my own feeling is that we need to be doing much more than that. Would each of you comment, please, on that?
Let me, because I've just done something, and maybe others might do it, and maybe they think it's crazy. But a group by the name of CALSA, and Pedro's well aware of them, are working very, very closely with these immigrant issues. And I suggested to them recently that they do like my credit union does, but set up a list of cell phone numbers or telephone numbers that they can call when there's an active ICE immigration raid going on.
Exactly.
And send this blast message out to me and other people. And if it's in the Mid-Willamette Valley, I will get up and I will go there, and I will be a witness to, along with my camera, of what's going on and a personal presence to make sure that something illegal doesn't go on, even if what is purported illegal is so abominable that it has to be witnessed and photographed as perhaps future evidence. But we need for people to put their bodies where their mouths are.
Yes, yes. Pedro?
Thank you for reminding me that, because we have the hotline. The hotline to call if you see ICE in your neighborhood or in your community. You can call to 888-622-1510. This is the rapid response team with the Portland Immigrant Rights Coalition. Now it's a statewide. Lots of rapid response team engage this number. Here in Salem, we have the Willamette Valley Rapid Response Collective. We train them how to document the abuse, how to document the presence of ICE in our community. Thank you for reminding me that. I forgot to say that.
Rabbi?
All right. Well, I just want to say that from my perspective, we need to also deal with the people who are already here. Salem for Refugees is a good organization. Yes. The Mid-Valley Literacy Center is also another good organization that trains people with the language, with the skills to live here so that they can reach a level of economic stability. And there are, of course, other agencies, and I would like to list those, and we'll see those at the end of the program. Their websites, along with these, will be listed so that everybody can take some time, jot down those numbers, and look into what volunteer opportunities there are, what events are being promoted, and how you as an individual can make a difference.
Well, once again, it looks like we're running out of time, but again, this will be an ongoing conversation. Thank you once again, all of you, for being with us this evening, and thank all of you for watching. And please think about what you've heard and seen tonight. And we'll be talking again, I'm sure. Thank you again.